Good afternoon. My name is Stefan Hanchero. I'm the RBC Curator. And on behalf of RBC, I'm pleased to welcome you to Art Toronto. Today we have a panel discussion moderated by Adelina Vlas, Head of Curatorial Affairs at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery. The talk titled Art of Our Time, New Artists at Art Toronto is presented by RBC. But before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are situated on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We are on Treaty 13 territory. Many Indigenous people continue to call this land home. RBC is proud to work closely with Indigenous employees, clients, and organizations, businesses, and communities to help build a more prosperous and collaborative future together. We are committed to integrating reconciliation work across our bank in new ways, incorporating Indigenous knowledge, practices, principles throughout our business and throughout the RBC Art Collection. This will mark RBC Wealth Management's 20th year of sponsoring Art Toronto and our 4th as principal sponsor of this world-class event, the largest exposition of art in Canada. At RBC, we deeply value the role of artists as innovators, both in our communities, and part of our commitment is to continue to equip the next generation of creatives with skills for a thriving future. We're proud that RBC and the RBC Foundation have invested more than $130 million to the arts and arts organizations since 2003. We also celebrate, it's great, right? We also celebrate and elevate Canada's arts community through initiatives like the RBC Community Gallery, which is located at Bay and Front Street at our RBC Main Branch Plaza, open Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So if you haven't been, check it out. As well as the RBC Art Collection, which was established in 1929 and focuses on acquiring works from emerging and contemporary Canadian artists. The collection currently holds over 6,000 pieces and is exhibited in RBC offices all over the world. RBC has a long-standing tradition of supporting and investing in the arts, and as we recognize the vital role art plays in building vibrant communities and strong economies. Thank you so much, Adelina. Thank you to our panelists. Take it away.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, everyone, for being here this afternoon. I see so many of you standing at the back, and I see empty seats here at the front. So please come and take a seat. And we promise we will not be offended if you walk halfway through and go back to the fair. So as Stefan mentioned, I am Adelina Vlas. I am the head of Curatorial Affairs at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery here in Toronto. It is my pleasure to moderate a conversation between 3 emerging artists whose works are presented in the Discover section of the art fair. Discover is a program co-created by Art Toronto and RBC to offer galleries exhibiting at the fair unparalleled opportunities to spotlight emerging artists, as well as artists who are re-emerging to new audiences. Each gallery was selected by a committee made up of Stefan Hanchero, who was here on stage, RBC curator, Mia Nilsson, the director of Art Toronto, and Rianne Chartrand, the Art Toronto Focus Exhibition curator and the Hatch curator of Indigenous Art and Culture at the Royal Ontario Museum. As you may know, and as Stefan mentioned, RBC has been long involved in supporting arts and artists, and they made an investment in emerging artists a priority. Since 2007, through the RBC Emerging Artist Program, RBC and RBC Foundation have supported organizations that provide the best opportunity to advance an artist's career trajectory and ensuring they're equipping the next generation of creatives with skills for a thriving future. My organization, the Power Plant, has been the recipient of such support, which has made a considerable difference in the professional development of emerging artists associated with us. A big thank you goes to RBC for their continuing support of contemporary artists and of this wonderful art fair. I would like to now introduce the 3 artists, emerging artists, who are sharing the stage with me. So I'll start with here on my left, Robin Crofut-Brittingham, who is represented by Tian Contemporary, a gallery who has a booth, the booth A70. Robin is a multidisciplinary artist and writer. Her work focuses on the creation of real and imagined worlds inspired by nature. The Illuminated Book of Birds, the first in a forthcoming series of nature books written and illustrated by the artist, will be published in 2025 by Hachette through Timber Press. She currently lives and works in Montreal, Canada. Welcome, Robin. Gio Swaby is represented by Claire Oliver Gallery, who is at booth C26. And her work is also included in the Focus exhibition titled The Place to Which We Return, and it's right outside this stage. Gio is a Bahamian visual artist whose practice is an exploratory celebration of blackness and womanhood. Her work centers on black joy as a radical act of resistance. It works through the philosophy of love as liberation, and explores pathways of healing and empowerment that allow space for both the strong and soft to coexist. She lives and works in Toronto. Welcome, Gio. And Sophia Lapres is represented by Towards Gallery in booth B42. Sophia works in between painting and writing, drawing from film, popular culture, as well as her own personal experiences. She creates intimate, atmospheric paintings that touch upon themes of longing, desire, and shame. Currently, she's showing new work in an exhibition titled Mixed Blessings at Towards Gallery in Toronto. She lives and works in this wonderful city of ours. Welcome, Sophia. So during our conversation, a slideshow with images of the works of each artist will be looping, and as a visual reference for you. But I do encourage you to go and see the work in person if you haven't done so before coming to this talk. We will chat for 45 minutes or so, and then we will open up for questions. So make sure to think about that as we go through our conversation. So my first question to kind of warm us up and give everyone a sense of who you are is to ask you to briefly outline your respective journeys that led you to become a professional artist. And I'll start with you, Robin.
Okay. Well, I was always art making, throughout my childhood and everything. But when I went to undergraduate, I actually sort of decided I was not going to make art and I was going to pursue other things. And what brought me back to art making was this feeling when I was in university that my eyes were sort of bigger than my stomach in terms of what I wanted to study. Like, I wanted to study classics, I wanted to study poetry, I wanted to study literature. And I found that art making allows you to do all of these things and incorporate them all back into your practice in a way that's not limiting the way some of these other disciplines are. So that was kind of what led me back, and then I went on to pursue my MFA and sort of bring in all these other disciplines that I had studied into the work that I started to make during my master's degree in San Francisco.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for being here in the first place. You could be a lot of other places, but you're here with us. We appreciate it. I would say, I feel like art kind of found me instead of the other way around. It begins with my villain origin story when I was 16 and I graduated high school, and I was at my 16th birthday dinner, and I was telling my family that, guys, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm going to be an art, I'm gonna study art. I didn't get the reception that I expected, so it was a little bit disheartening, but a lot of times when I'm told that I can't, then that makes me want to do it more. And I pursued it through, I first started in the Bahamas, where I was born and raised, at the College of the Bahamas, where I feel like I learned a lot of the basics, got my foundation there, and I also studied at Emily Carr, and I did my MFA at OCAD. Art has always been intrinsically a part of my life in one way or another. It's not that I was a person who grew up around art or going to art galleries in any way, but it's always been something that I feel was missing until I found it, and then I felt a sense of belonging, that this is what I was meant to do and where I was meant to be, regardless of how much money it made, which for a long time it was 15 cents maybe on the dollar. So, but it's been an incredible journey, and I'm excited for where I am now.
I guess like both of you, my art has always been a big part of my life. My parents are artists. They met at the Banff residency. And I really resisted pursuing art. I went to school to study art history. It was like my way of rebelling against my parents in a way. But it wasn't working. It wasn't like quite scratching the itch. So I switched to visual arts undergrad and got my MFA. Just graduated with it this year, actually. Yeah.
So a follow-up question to that is, because here we are in this context of the art fair, emerging artists, first look, first kind of time. How did you arrive at having a relationship with a commercial gallery and working with a commercial gallery? Because otherwise you will not be here at the art fair. Most of the artists who are here is because they have gallery representation. I think that is a very crucial step in the career of an artist when they sign up to be represented by a gallery. So can you share with us how that happened for you?
I guess it's sort of like a series of chance encounters. I went to school in San Francisco and then moved back to the East Coast, where I'm from. And I moved to Montreal and became connected with a gallery that ended up closing. And then I had met my current gallery just from a chance encounter, and she had shown my work in a group show, and then we sort of fell out of touch, and then in the last few years we've become, because I was no longer with this other gallery that had closed, we developed a relationship. And I have to say, like, now, having shown at a few commercial galleries and then landing at this one that's really an amazing fit, it's very special to have a gallery that is not only trying to sell your work, which of course is great, but also like really trying to nurture your career. So I feel now that I've ended up at this gallery where our relationship is much more intimate. We are talking about the larger picture of where I want to take my career and the kinds of themes I want to explore and the kinds of opportunities I want to go after, whereas I had been at some commercial galleries where it was really about selling, which there's nothing wrong with, but I'm very happy to have landed there.
I like this question a lot because this can be something that's very opaque, and not a lot of people talk about, and I think it's just might be because every pathway is so different. I haven't really spoken to any other artist who has, everyone has done it a different way. So the way that I came to be with my current gallery, Claire Oliver Gallery, is I was entering a lot of shows. This was around like 2017 to 2019, putting my work in open calls. And a curator for one of those exhibitions introduced me to the owner of the gallery. And I liked the artists already that they were representing. I felt like a lot of what they wanted to do with their gallery and what I wanted to do with my work aligned in a really nice way. And it felt like a place that we could start from to explore together, which I liked. And it's been really incredible what we've been able to achieve together. Yes, so that's how it came to be.
Yeah, I agree with Gio. It's really opaque sometimes how to find a gallery that wants to work with you and that you want to work with, because it is a lot like dating, like you do have to get along. I was putting together a show with the then director Alex Beauron of Nicolas Robert for it was like a grad show with my master's program. This was last summer. And we were talking and organizing and trying to, get everything delivered on time, et cetera, do install. And she, just through conversations with her, put me in touch with Kevin, who is the director of Towards. And that was the first time that Towards showed my work was at Art Toronto last year. And so for a now exact year, we've been working together, and it's been really fulfilling and great. Yeah.
Now that you've had a chance to take in the images, let's start talking a little bit about the work. You each have very unique visual languages and use materials in kind of particular ways. Can you talk about your choice of materials as well as the scale? Because I think that's also quite particular for each of you. So maybe we'll start with Sophia.
Okay, I'll start with scale first. Most of the paintings, not all, but most of the paintings I make right now are quite small, like 8.5 by, what did it say? Like 8.5 by 12, 8.5 by 13 inches or so. You can see one of my small paintings at the Towards booth. So I work at a smaller scale, which makes sense for me now because the images that I'm working with and through are kind of, they're intimate and domestic, so it makes sense for me that they would be on a smaller scale. I generally make a painting a day, and I like being able to rapidly move through material. And then the materials that I'm using, I paint on paper, and I've been painting on aluminum panels for a year now. The benefit of the aluminum panels for me is the rigidity of the surface. I was painting on board or canvas against the wall, and both of those were offering a similar rigid support, but there are some artists that work on aluminum who I'm really interested in, like Dyke Blair is a New York artist, Damien Moppet is a Vancouver artist, Alex Katz has done some work on aluminum. And there's something about the slipperiness of the material that allows the paint to really sit on top. They're very shiny paintings. The material, the paint, the quality of the paint is very thin, sits on top, it almost glows. And because I'm thinking so much about the seductiveness of pictures, there's something about the slick surface that really aligns with that for me. And it recalls an iPhone screen in some ways. I'm getting the panels made custom, and so they have these rounded edges, which are a little bit evocative of an Apple iPhone. Go see for yourself.
So the material that I've been really deeply focused on is working in textiles and fiber. All of the work, all of the portraiture is made with fabrics and threads. For me as an artist, I think about making work for people like me that didn't grow up with a very strong relationship to art in the sense of not visiting a lot of museums, not visiting a lot of galleries. Those spaces can be incredibly intimidating. Historically very exclusionary, so it's, that's not by accident. I wanted to work with textiles because I just feel there's such a familiarity to the material. It's very accessible, something that we come into contact with almost every moment of our lives, from the moment that we're born. And to me, it's also about this practice of love. Sewing to me was passed down to me from my mother, from her mother. There's such a rich history in this material and in this technique that I want to bring into my work because it is about an expression of love. I found, that's the purpose of my practice. For me is to, try to figure out how in as many ways I can shift and show this expression of love to myself, and to the people represented in the works, to the people that will see the works, how can I bring this energy through? And I think textiles has a really beautiful way of doing that. And scale-wise, I like to work life-size. Like 90% of what I do is life-size, whether it's like a bust portrait or a full-body portrait. I want it to feel like you are actually connecting with a person. When there's multiple works in a space, it feels like coming into a community. There's a space of like welcome and warmth that I want to generate. The portraits that I make are all of Black women, of myself and other Black women that I know. And I'm thinking about when Black people come into these spaces and see the work, what kind of experience I want them to have. And I want them to feel not as I felt, but like welcomed into the space. I wanted to feel like, you know, something familiar. They could recognize someone that they know through the work. And the scale and the material makes that an important reality for me.
Yeah, so when I was first asked about this panel, it was proposed as sort of this panel for painters. And I said to Adelina, like, I thought that was funny because I guess I consider like painters to be these like serious people who use oils and materiality, and like you know, I have so much respect for that, and I really consider myself this person who's drawing essentially, even though I work with watercolor. And so I guess for me, I with my framing, because I use these frames that are unusual shapes, and I started doing that maybe 6 years ago, and I'm fortunate to have a partner who's a woodworker, so this was kind of an idea I had that I started experimenting with, but I thought what I wanted to do was kind of elevate this practice of like using watercolor and using drawing, which are sort of these mediums that are often something that you do before you make like the real painting. So I liked the idea of creating kind of a way to present them that would make them more significant and would make them feel like the main work. And then also for me, like the presentation of the work is part of the narrative that I want to present, because I use my paintings, if you go look at them, they look a bit like altarpieces, and that's important to me to sort of echo that history of storytelling. And also, like, I liked the idea of a folding triptych, which originally was used to carry religious stories to people. So, you know, there's a practicality to it, to being able to like break down your story and bring it to the next town to sort of spread information. So I was really seduced by that idea. Yeah.
Well, while we're on the subject of materials and scale, how much of it is informed also about what do you have available as a studio space? Do any of you, in this very difficult, you know, maybe Montreal is a little bit better, but I know that in Toronto is a challenge for artists to find the spaces where they can produce work on larger scale. So, how much of is your dream to work bigger, or is this the size that satisfies where you're at right now?
Well, so I used to have this really like huge, like sexy Montreal studio that had like an amazing view and everything, and I gave it up a few years ago, and so now my studio is in my house and it's very small, and but I have a 2-year-old, so I value having a studio at home because I can like go in there for short periods. But I think, it's funny because this is not why I started making them, but now that I'm making these pieces in multiple parts, like the piece I most recently made didn't fit in all its parts in my studio at one time. And I actually found the experience of doing that kind of interesting because I had conceived of the piece and I had sketches and I had all the components, but I never actually got to see them all together until it was mounted in a gallery. And so that kind of is, even though that was kind of an accident, that's now something I'm interested in doing, is sort of like, oh, if you make especially because my work has narrative components, like if you make a story in parts and then put it together, something is revealed to you, even if you are the artist making it. So now I'm kind of using the constraints of my tiny studio as part of the work.
Yeah, I have a big studio now, which I am so thankful for. It's incredible, but for a lot of the time I worked in small spaces, like so small, if you turn around too fast, you could slam into a wall. Like, I am from the Bahamas, and, we find a way. We figure it out. Like, since I started my practice there, the access to material is not, it's not always readily available. Sometimes you have to figure out another way to get your idea across. So if I want to work big and I'm in a small space, maybe that means working on small panels and putting them all together, which I've done in this fair for the 9-piece grid. Maybe that means like working in strips and then attaching them later. More than space too, it could be like an issue of resources, like financial resources, of being able to, what can you actually afford? Like, there's definitely been times in the past where okay, there's how much canvas that's left, like that's it. So I'll have to figure out, how can I use this, or how can I use another material to stretch this or make it more? Now that because I work with sewing machines too, the size is important. You can only make something so big on a certain size sewing machine. So I feel really lucky now to have a larger scale machine, to have a space where I can think bigger if I would like to. I have like my biggest encouragers, and also, in a good and a bad way, they're like, you should do something that's 50 feet, no, 100 feet, no, a mile. So it's always going to be like pushing it, but it's not always pushing it in size too. I like to also experiment with my technique. Like, how can I keep learning and exploring through this medium to keep it interesting for me as a maker?
Yeah, I don't really even know. I mean, of course I would like to paint bigger. I think all painters have this kind of like ego thing of wanting to like make the biggest painting they can make. But the small scale is really working for me right now. It has also, it's coincided nicely with having been downgraded studio-wise. Like, you get a nice studio at the MFA program that I was at, and now I'm back to my tiny little super hot or super cold space. So it's lucky that I have just happened upon this like success with the smaller size. I'm interested in making a big painting. I've been thinking about making some big paintings on paper. Mm-hmm. We'll see. It's very different. Like, gesturally, you have to change brush. You're not working from your wrist anymore. You're working from your elbow and your shoulder. So there's a lot of things that go along with like scaling up that you have to think about.
And of course, there's a question of verticality, horizontality, how you work when things get bigger, right? You don't have the same flexibility in terms of how you manipulate the surface.
Yeah, and just given that I'm working on one thing a day or two things a day, like finishing at least one painting in a day, would I finish one big painting in a day and do like a marathon round? I don't know. I have no idea.
Well, let's dive a little bit deeper into the work, and each of you have chosen particular subjects to explore in your work. I would like to hear you talk about why you're interested in those subjects, and what is the critical or political lens that you're using in your exploration. So maybe we'll start with Gio this time.
Oh, switching it up, keeping us on our toes. Okay. The politics of my work is incredibly important. It's where I start. I feel like I have a really big ethical responsibility in representing people I take it very, very seriously, and I approach my process with a lot of reverence. So that's starting with the photography session, and I don't really consider myself a photographer. I don't ever share those photos, but it's that time of connection and getting to know the person, being able, even if I already know them, the intentionality of connecting through this process of asking them questions like maybe I never would have through this intimate experience of photographing one-on-one. And I want to kind of bring that energy through to the final piece. When you see it, it's like full of who the person is, of that energy, our connection. And that like physical work is a tribute to them. I made a very particular decision to focus on Blackness, representing Blackness through my work, because I mean, it only seems natural. Like portraiture is often so reflective of the self. I mean, for me, literally, I make a lot of self-portraits, but it was about documenting my community. I started first with my family and friends because those are the people around me that I wanted to share this experience of love with, that I wanted to bring into this process and to connect more deeply with. And that's, you know, also kind of the primary audience I'm considering when I'm making these works for exhibition. That, you know, I'm thinking of my nieces and nephews as young kids, young Black kids going to an exhibition and seeing a reflection of themselves, how important it is at that early age, what that would have meant for me, and how it could have shifted a lot of things for me. To me, those moments are just so gratifying and special. It's like one of the highlights for me of creating this work, to be able to create this sort of representation. And I mean, people ask a lot if it feels like a burden or something that I have to keep doing, and it is the opposite. To me, it's a gift to be able to share that. To share that with people, to then further the conversation when I connect with people in the space, looking at the work, and also the people that I'm representing, the actual person in that portrait, seeing themselves, just to show them in a new light is so beautiful. These are the things that are really important to me. That's why I choose to work this way. And things shift over time. It might change with time. I'm very open to that, but I think my heart will always be a really big part of what I choose to make as an artist.
Robin?
So my work is, well, I'm interested in making work that's not like explicitly political, because I like the idea of drawing people in based on just beauty, and then the political concerns like coming out of a closer look at the work. So I make these sort of fantasy landscapes, and for me, what they represent is this kind of utopia that's sort of also a dystopia. It's like the way that the world would look if it was taken back by nature, and if like because I think that there's this really interesting, as humans, we have this idea that we can control nature and we can produce things and we can grow things and everything. And I became really fascinated by the idea that there's this duality of like nature being something that we can control, but also something that's like extremely dangerous to us. And I came to that idea as it relates to my work sort of through reading sci-fi and reading like there's a book called The Drowned World, this like classic sci-fi text where there's a guy who's like going through a very overheated world, and there's like, these beautiful giant jungle flora sort of like falling out at him. And there's this quote from the book that like inspired an exhibition of mine a few years ago that I can't recite, but the idea of it is that this person is finding themselves in a strange new Eden. So it's like this utopia that's like incredibly beautiful and lush and filled with plant life, but it's also like terrifying, and like he's trying to survive, and you know there's all these threatening elements around him. So that's kind of the inspiration behind these landscapes that I'm creating. But yeah, I think I want people to be drawn in, you know, for whatever reason they are, and then they can sort of think about those things afterwards. So my works have a lot of hidden details and like hidden sort of references to those things, but they also from a distance can look just like these giant floral paintings. So yeah.
Yeah, I think like Robin, I'm approaching the images with like, I guess maybe a criticality is more accurate than like an overt political idea. I mean, I think all art has a politic embedded in it in whatever way. So I paint from photographs. I always have like, you know, binders full of photographs that I reference. And recently they've been pictures of like couples kissing and, you know, houses that would have like a white picket fence around them, like this very kind of, I don't know, just like a domesticity, a softness, a romance. I think leisure I'm depicting quite often, like people in water. And I was collecting all of these pictures and wondering like why they are both so ubiquitous and why I'm so interested in them and why I'm attracted to them. And so I started painting them to like examine my own desire for these pictures. And in painting them, I think I'm kind of pulling that apart a little bit and like examining them with a criticality. There's this great Mary Cassatt painting that is a woman kissing her baby, and it's very sweet on first impression. And then you look at it again, and it looks like their faces have melted together, and it's this like, you get this body horror thing happening. And I like the duality of that and the ambiguity of like how she's approaching domesticity and motherhood in this picture, and that's something that I like hope to do with a lot of my paintings, is to like embed it with an ambiguity. Like I paint a lot of couples kissing, and something else I try to do to like embed the picture with like some kind of twist is the titling. My titles are like quite long often and have a sense of irony or humor or, I don't know, unease.
Can we take a moment here and maybe ask you to consider where do you see yourself kind of in an artistic lineage, or who were your influences? Some of you mentioned already names or ways of working that relate to particular traditions or particular ways of working, but are there artists you look up to that have influenced you and continue to do so? Maybe we'll start with Robin this time.
Yeah, so I get inspiration from many different places. I certainly relate most to artists who are sort of using like a more illustrative practice, but using illustration in a way that's sort of generative instead of like prescriptive. So it's like, you know, there's ambiguity to what is being illustrated, and it creates an experience where you're sort of projecting your own story onto it. So like I love like Marcel Zama and Sherry Boyle and Robin O'Neill and like these artists, most of whom also have a practice that involves working on paper, because that's my thing. But also like I find with all of those artists, you look at their figures and their scenes and you're sort of like, what's happening here? And you can just see it as like a nice scene, and then there's also usually something sort of more foreboding happening, because like that's always the line I want to push, is like something that looks seductive and looks beautiful and looks like you know what's going on, and then upon closer inspection there's something foreboding or something that you hadn't foreseen, and what that is can be produced by the person looking at it. It's not necessarily explicit. So
I connect with a lot of art that comes out of the Caribbean, out of the Bahamas where I'm from, it just feels like home in a way, or it feels like something inside, or like other people can see it, but when we see it, we see a little bit more. And I always really enjoyed that. So artists like Ebony Patterson is a very huge influence. Kendra Fropp, a Bahamian artist whose work, when I first saw it, I was like, okay, this is like where I would like to go. I started to get a different understanding of how art could be or what you could do with it. Textile artist, Belisa Ngewa, so intimate, so emotional, just very complex through simple imagery, which is where I want to go with my work as well. Faith Ringgold, the absolute master of this form, who has really paved the way in so many instances. And then my peers, like I have my studios next door to two other Bahamian artists, my friends and partner Veronica Dorset and Stephen Schmidt over there. And we like have a think tank. Like I feel like, if I want real honesty, this is where I can go. They are definitely not the yes people. And then we find fun ways to explore our practice. Like if anyone, if anyone's ever watched Dance Moms, like I'll do different versions of the same work, and then I'll try to make a decision which is the right photograph. So we do like the Dance Mom pyramid. Like this is gonna be number one of the day. Anyway, sorry.
Well,
Sorry.
You're making a good point, because sometimes we like to think that artists, really, you have that history to kind of make sense of and try to fit into. But most of the time, the most influential people are your peers, are the ones who are your generation, who are sharing studio spaces, who are there to give you their thoughts, on what you're doing, where you're going. So thank you for that, because I know we all like to hear the big names, but sometimes it's also the names that are closer to us and more familiar that are playing that role.
Absolutely.
Manet. I love Manet. It's such a gimme answer, but so good. I love the intimists. I've written down a bunch of names in anticipation of this question, because I'm such a chronic forgetter of names, under pressure. Like Vuillard and Valeton, and Pierre Bonnard is wonderful. I love Sargent. Just the capital P painters. Love. Yeah.
I love that. I think it's great. I mean, go and look at Sophia's paintings with those names in mind, and then I think you'll see, something very, very different. I'm going to ask my last question. So this is an invitation for you in the audience to think if you have any questions. But as we talk about the subject matter and kind of the criticality of your work, we cannot ignore that we're living in a very complicated moment that makes it very hard to imagine a future at times, and to live in hope and to live with joy. But nevertheless, art is here to remind us that there's beauty and there's joy, and that we must hang on to hope. So my last question to you is, where do you find hope and joy in your everyday? And I'll start with Sophia, and we'll come.
I've recently been looking at a lot of paintings of gardens, and I just finished Orwell's Roses by Rebecca Solnit, which kind of centers this idea that a garden is this gesture that is always forward-looking and generous. I've been really, really liking Jordan Castile's paintings of her garden. I've been finding a lot of comfort in paintings of gardens. Yeah.
Food. I love to eat. It's just the most joyful experience in the world. Absolute euphoria to have a great meal. I love to I love to spend time with my family, my friends. Like I have 9 nieces and nephews, and I feel like those are the people who get me. I'm like, you know, we like the same things. Like we want to watch Jurassic World, like Camp Cretaceous on Netflix together, and that's why I love to spend time with them and learn everything that they're learning. The Avatar ride at Disney's Animal Kingdom. If you ever want to experience pure joy, go there and go on Flight of Passage. It was like, yeah, it's the most incredible experience. And genuinely, I do find joy through my work and practice, like making and being in the studio. It's like 30% of being an artist, to be honest, but it's my favorite 30% of my whole life. I love it.
Yeah, I agree 100% with everything you both said. And I guess I also find a lot of joy just in community. And like, since I moved to Montreal, it took me a really long time to feel established there. Like it was a very long, dark winter, the first one I was there. But I've now established this like really wonderful group of friends who, a lot of whom are not artists, but we all work at home in our little caves and sort of come out to walk around and have coffee together once a day. And it's like means the world to me to have that connection with people. And then I love reading. I get a lot of my ideas from reading fiction. And like people are always teasing me that I have this like really dark taste in fiction. Like I like the type of books that make you like cry in bed afterwards, or like, and that people are always like, how can you read this? It's like so depressing. But I actually, not to sound cheesy, but I find those works to be like joyful in that I'm like, oh, someone can write something or someone can paint something and it can make you feel something. And that to me is like joyful and inspiring and like makes me want to keep making things, because I'm like, oh, this can like provoke this really strong reaction from people. And that gives me hope that, you know, like we can all sort of, I don't know, I guess engage with one another on an artistic level and sort of like get people to think about things and get people to feel things. And I find that joyful.
Thank you. Are there any questions in the audience?
Thank you so much for sharing your stories. It's great to hear about it. And so the topic today is art of our time, new artists at Art Toronto. And so Sophia talked about that motherhood. Gio talked about her nieces and nephews, and Robin spoke about the 2-year-old that you have. So keeping in mind that new generation, what message would you share with those people in your life that you would convey through art, or just a general message of life?
I think the overall thing is for me to have like an honesty and truth to who you are. Like follow your real interests. Like what does your heart say you want? I mean, when you're 2, it might say dirt, but you know, I want to leave like this openness and space to grow in a way that is not always encouraged or allowed. Like we're taught so much to just think inside one specific box. And to me, being able to open that up and say, you know, what if we colored on the wall today and not the coloring book? I'm not allowed to go over to their houses anymore, but yeah, I just think like trying to maintain that creativity and trying to say, hey, it's okay to be, maybe you're a little bit weird, a little bit different than other people. I wish I had been encouraged to explore that a little bit more, and that's what I hope that I offer to them too.
Yeah, I would agree with all that, and also just say, like, I think sort of finding your own authenticity is really important. I had this moment when I was in grad school and I was having a studio critique, and I showed one of my professors like one of my drawings from when I was like 10, and he was like, well, this is way better than anything you're making now. And like it actually was like a big moment for me, because I was like, at that time I was like reading Lord of the Rings and making these like vast worlds filled with like orcs and dragons and stuff, and it's like I was like, oh yeah, like what would it look like if I sort of like got back in touch with that part of myself that just wanted to like generate worlds and just wanted to, you know, use my imagination. And I think like imagination is this really powerful way to understand, you know, first of all, just to escape and have fun, but like also to understand the world, the reality.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Yeah, no, I have not.
Okay, the question all the way at the back.
Thank you. It's a wonderful conversation that you've offered. I want to shift the tone for a minute. When I was teaching, I would say to my students, at the end of a session that you've been working in the darkroom or in the studio, take whatever work you have, put it up on the wall in your studio, take a glass of cognac and some quiet music, and sit quietly back and say to the work, now talk to me. The question that I would like to ask you is, what, from all three of you in your own particular context, what is the work telling to you?
That's a beautiful question. I think I want to be in conversation with what I'm making, and I feel like a lot of that has deepened so much since I started valuing as much of the knowledge from the heart and the head, not prioritizing one over the other. I try to give each piece what it needs instead of what I want to give it. So sometimes that means living, I guess, with it for a while. Being open to failure of it and things not working out. And I wanted to be informed by the person that I'm representing, but also to capture them in this moment right now. And it does mean, I guess, a lot of listening and a lot of honesty. Honesty when it comes to self-portraiture specifically, because it's me making it. I could also edit it. There's things everyone is like insecure about or they don't like about themselves. And for me, leaving those things in, it's hard every time, but it's part of the process that I prioritize and enjoy, because I feel like the work has shown me a new version of myself that sometimes I don't recognize, but I can connect with in a new way. So even though I'm making this portrait of myself, it still shows me like parts within me that I hadn't really recognized or known. So I guess I'm getting to know myself a little bit better through this process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question, and it makes me think. I have this artist friend who says there's artists who work to think and there's artists who think to work. And like, I've always considered myself a work to think. Like, I have a really hard time just sort of sitting in silence. And so for better or worse, like, I'm sort of just always working and, you know, and then letting that inform what I'm doing. But I do think recently what's been happening to me in terms of like my own dialogue with my work is that since it's now been a while that I've been working on this series that I'm working on now, there's all these elements that I developed based on like very particular things that I was doing or at that time. And so as I like go back to use this sort of visual language I've created, it reminds me of these times in my life that like led me to create that visual cue. Like I use all these oranges in my painting, and like I started doing that when I lived in California, like driving through fields of like these orange grove monocultures and sort of thinking about this like abundance that was out there. And I haven't lived there in years, so like these things that I guess talk back to me are like these visual cues that I've created based on like sort of other versions of myself that I've moved on from.
Yeah, definitely things come up that you weren't expecting. I would change almost the question a little bit. I'm not so much like leaving the work or stepping back from the work at the end of the day. I'm stepping away from it like incrementally, because I think I am such a chronic overworker. Like I'll like overwork the painting until it's ruined. And so it's really good to step back like every hour or every even 30 minutes and like see what it needs to be done. Sometimes it's finished right away. Like sometimes it's immediate. I think that's been something that I've learned recently is responding as you're painting to the work and like not forcing it to be what you thought you wanted it to be, and listening in that way.
I don't see any more hands up, so maybe this is the moment to wrap it up and thank these three wonderful artists who have shared so much with us. Thank you for your generosity. Sophia, Gio, Robin.
Thank you.
Thank you, the audience, for being here and spending this hour with us. I will encourage you to go and look at the work in person and appreciate its beauty in person. And thanks go to RBC and Art Toronto for organizing this conversation. Thank you.